The night she found the folder on her husband's laptop, everything she thought she knew about her life collapsed in an instant. Inside that folder, 7 years of evidence, screenshots, emails, voicemails saved as audio files, all of them from the same person. Not a rival, not a stranger, the woman who had hugged her at her wedding, the woman who called her my daughter, her mother-in-law. This is the story of Sarah, and the 7 years she spent trying to understand why the woman who was supposed to love her like a daughter was quietly, methodically destroying her from the inside. Sarah was 28 years old when she met Daniel at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in Chicago. He was quiet, thoughtful, and laughed at all the wrong moments, which she later said was exactly what made her fall for him. They dated for 2 years, slowly, carefully, the way people do when they've been hurt before. By the time Daniel proposed, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt since childhood, completely, unconditionally safe. She said yes without hesitation. Daniel's family lived 40 minutes away, a small, tight-knit household. His father, Robert, was a retired engineer who barely spoke but always made sure your glass was full. His sister Amanda texted Sarah memes about reality TV shows within the first week of meeting her. And then there was Margaret. Daniel's mother was 61 years old, impeccably dressed, and had a way of smiling that made you feel simultaneously welcomed and evaluated. She was the kind of woman who always remembered your birthday and always found a way to make you feel slightly guilty for not calling more often. When Sarah first met Margaret, she tried. She brought flowers. She asked questions about Daniel's childhood. She complimented the house. And Margaret smiled and poured tea and said all the right things. But something, Sarah said later, felt slightly off, like a painting hanging 2 degrees crooked on the wall. You notice it, but you tell yourself you're imagining things. They got married on a Saturday in October. The venue was a converted barn outside the city. String lights, wildflowers, the smell of wood smoke. Sarah spent 8 months planning every detail. And Margaret smiled through all of it. She danced at the reception, hugged Sarah's mother, told everyone what a beautiful bride her son had chosen. But an hour before the ceremony, Margaret knocked on the door of the bridal suite. She said she just wanted to see Sarah before the walk down the aisle. What she said next, Sarah would replay in her mind for years. You know, Daniel has always needed a lot of support. He doesn't always show it, but he depends on people very deeply. I just hope you understand what you're taking on. Then she smiled, adjusted Sarah's veil, and left. Sarah told herself it was just nerves, maybe a mother being overprotective. She walked down the aisle and pushed the feeling away. They honeymooned in Portugal for 2 weeks. It was, by every measure, perfect. But when they came home, something had shifted. Margaret began calling Daniel every day, sometimes twice a day. Nothing dramatic. She'd ask about dinner, about work, about whether he'd seen the news. But the calls were constant, and they were always when Sarah and Daniel were together. When Sarah mentioned it, Daniel said his mother had always been like this. "She's just attentive," he said. "She doesn't mean anything by it." Sarah nodded and said nothing. Over the next 7 years, Margaret never did anything that could be called obviously cruel. There were no screaming matches, no direct insults. What she did was far more sophisticated than that. She planted seeds. Every time Daniel visited alone, which happened more and more, Margaret would find something small to mention. "I noticed Sarah seemed tired lately. Is everything all right with her?" Or, "Daniel, you know you can always come home if you need a break." Daniel would come home from these visits quieter, more withdrawn, When Sarah asked what they talked about, he would say, "Nothing, just family stuff." The distance between them grew so slowly that Sarah barely noticed it happening. It wasn't dramatic, it was erosion. Year 2, Margaret started a family WhatsApp group that did not include Sarah. When Sarah found out, Daniel said it was just for family updates and that he'd ask his mother to add her. He never did. Year 3, Sarah miscarried at 10 weeks. It was devastating. Daniel was supportive at first, but within a week, Margaret was calling twice a day again. And the calls started lasting an hour. Sarah would lie in their bedroom grieving, while Daniel sat in the kitchen talking to his mother. She never said anything. She told herself he needed his mother during hard times too. Year 4. At a family Christmas, Margaret pulled aside Sarah's sister-in-law, Amanda, and, in what she thought was a private conversation, said that she wasn't sure Sarah was the right fit for Daniel, that Daniel deserved someone who could give him a real family. Amanda told Sarah the next day, shaking. When Sarah confronted Daniel, he defended his mother. She was probably just venting. She doesn't mean it. You know how she gets. It was the first time Sarah cried in front of him about his mother. It would not be the last. Year 5. Margaret started sending Daniel articles, parenting articles, relationship articles, articles about incompatibility and knowing when to walk away. She sent them with no comment, just forwarded links. Daniel would read them and say nothing to Sarah, but Sarah started noticing the silence, the way Daniel would look at her sometimes, assessing, questioning, in a way he never had before. Year 6, they tried therapy. It helped briefly, but every 2 steps forward, Daniel would visit his mother and come back 1 step behind. The therapist noted something she found unusual, that Daniel seemed to have 2 completely different emotional registers depending on whether he'd recently seen his mother. Sarah started keeping notes, dates, what was said, what changed afterward. It was, she realized much later, the beginning of understanding what was actually happening. Year 7, she found the folder. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen table. He was in the shower. Sarah walked past it on the way to make coffee, and the screen caught her eye. The folder on the desktop was labeled Mom, Keep. She almost didn't open it. She almost made her coffee and walked away. But something, 7 years of something, made her sit down. Inside the folder were 847 files, screenshots of text messages, forwarded emails, voice notes, saved as MP3 files, labeled by date going back to the first year of their marriage. She started reading. In the text messages, Margaret had been telling Daniel for years, consistently, patiently, relentlessly, that Sarah was emotionally unstable, that she was isolating him from his real family, that his unhappiness, whenever he expressed any, was Sarah's fault, that he had settled. In one message from 3 years earlier, the week after Sarah's miscarriage, Margaret had written, "Maybe this is a sign, Daniel. Maybe this isn't the life you were meant to have." Sarah sat at that kitchen table for 40 minutes. She heard the shower turn off. She heard Daniel moving around the bedroom. She didn't move. When he walked in and saw her face, he knew immediately. He looked at the screen. He sat down across from her. "How long have you known?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, and in that silence, Sarah got her answer. Daniel said he had known his mother sent these kinds of messages. He said he hadn't realized how many there were. He said he thought he had been managing it, filtering what he listened to, deciding what was worth repeating. He had, he admitted, sometimes believed her. When they argued, when things were hard, he had let his mother's voice fill the silence in his head. He hadn't told Sarah because he thought he was protecting her. He thought if he kept it between himself and his mother, it would eventually stop. It hadn't stopped. It had never stopped. Sarah stood up. She told Daniel she needed him to call his mother right now, with her in the room, and tell her what he had just told Sarah, that he knew, that it was done, that it would never happen again. He called. Margaret answered on the second ring, warm and cheerful. And then Daniel spoke, quietly, clearly, without hesitation. He told his mother that he had found out what she had been sending him, that he understood now what she had been doing, that it was over. Margaret denied it at first, then she said she was only trying to help, then she cried. Daniel stayed calm throughout. When the call ended, he put the phone down on the table and looked at his wife. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have seen it. I should have stopped it. I'm sorry it took this long." Sarah didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "I need to know if you actually believe her about any of it, about me." He said, "No, I never should have let any of it in. I'm sorry I did." That was 6 months ago. Sarah and Daniel are still together. They're back in therapy, together this time, and with a therapist who specializes in family enmeshment. Progress is slow. Trust, once broken in the way theirs was, takes time to rebuild. But they are rebuilding. Margaret has not spoken to Daniel since the phone call. She sent one letter through his sister saying she had done nothing wrong and that she hoped he would come to his senses. He did not respond. Amanda, Daniel's sister, has been quietly supportive of Sarah. She told her recently that he had seen signs of her mother's behavior for years, but hadn't known how to name it. "I thought it was just how she was," Amanda said. "I didn't realize what it was doing." Sarah says the hardest part wasn't the discovery, it wasn't even the confrontation. It was the years before, the years of telling herself she was imagining things, the years of shrinking herself to make room for someone else's narrative about who she was. "I kept thinking I wasn't enough," she said, "but I was never the problem, I was just the obstacle." She is 37 now. She runs a small interior design business. She started during the pandemic. She has a rescue dog named Olive who, she says, has been the most uncomplicated relationship in her life for years. She doesn't know yet what her marriage will look like in another year. She doesn't know if the damage can be fully repaired or if some of it is permanent. What she knows is that she is no longer willing to disappear in order to keep the peace. "I spent 7 years being managed," she said. "I'm done being managed." Stories like Sarah's don't always have clean endings. They don't always end in triumph or full reconciliation. Sometimes they end in the quieter, harder kind of resolution. The kind where you simply decide that your own life matters more than keeping someone comfortable in their cruelty. If you've lived something like this, if you've spent years wondering whether the problem was you, know that recognizing the pattern is the first step, and you are not imagining it.
Thank you for watching Shattered Trust. New stories every week. If this one stayed with you, leave a comment below. Your words matter more than you know, and if you're not subscribed yet, this is your reminder.